Can you hear me now? Yes, I can hear the echo. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Search conference. For those of you who are here this morning, I may not need introduction, but for whomever is joining us this afternoon for this afternoon session, my name is Marc Vermeulen. I'm the head of Heritage Science and Conservation Research at TNA, and I will be chairing this Art and Heritage session where we will explore a fascinating intersection between art heritage and scientific research. So without further ado, let's dive into the first talk. So our first speaker is Dr. Constantina Vlachou-Mogire, Heritage Science Manager at Historic Royal Palaces. Constantina will discuss the impact of infrastructure, investment in historic royal palaces, heritage science research, highlighting how targeted investment can transform research capabilities and conservation outcomes. Please join me in welcoming Constantina. Constantina, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, great. So I'm delighted to be joining you today to talk about the impact of the infrastructure investment we have had in our research at Historic Royal Palaces. For those who might not be familiar with our organization, Historic Royal Palaces is a charity that looks after 6 historic sites, as you can see on your slide, including the palaces, the buildings, but also the collections. The science team sits within the Conservation, Collections Care, and Collections Management Department, and we're actually 2 scientists. My colleague, Dr. Moira Bertassa, is also attending today, and also we have a technician. But as you can see, our remit is quite large. Of course, our immediate clients are our conservators that are sitting within the department, which are treatment conservators, but also preventive conservators. But also we're working very closely with our curators, surveyors, education department, interpretation, in any other activities we have in the palaces. Also, we work closely with other heritage organizations, so universities. We have had collaborative PhD students. And also, we're sitting in heritage bodies like ICON or the National Heritage Science Forum or the British Standards. We are based in Hampton Court Palace. Our lab was established 35 years ago. And as you can see, the top left images, we have a main lab and a wet lab, but also recently, 3 years ago, we received a grant from Arts and Humanities Research Council that we created the 3rd area. You can see at the bottom, and I will be talking more about that in my presentation. But also, we're not based just in the lab. We work across our palaces. We're a very active team, and we're very often up on scaffolding and where our collections are. Examples of previous research projects. We started in our lab, we started with research on historic textiles. But over the years, we have expanded to oil paintings, like the amazing group and ceiling paintings we have at the banqueting house in Whitehall. And also, as I mentioned, we collaborate with universities. Examples of PhD projects range from historic tapestries to stonework at the Tower of London. We also had a program to support young scientists. We had the scholarship in collaboration with Center for Sustainable Heritage in UCL. So the Institute for Sustainable Heritage, sorry. And over the years, we had 4 students attending part-time at UCL in master's level. And when they were not based in the university, they were working with us in a particular area of interest for our research. Sorry, I didn't mention that the program, the scholarship has paused because of after the pandemic. But we are trying to instigate an apprenticeship in heritage science technician, and we hope that post will start from September 2025. And let's proceed now with the upgrades we had through this amazing investment we received as part of the capabilities for collections grants. As I mentioned, we instigated a new area in our palace, and the equipment we were able to access through this investment was ranging from microscopes equipped with amazing cameras to capture our collections in detail, 3D laser scanning, a lot of analytical capabilities, because previously we were commissioning out quite a lot of this type of work. So now we have access to portable XRF, FTIR, but also large-scale equipment like an SCM EDS, instruments to prepare cross-sections, an HPLC, but also an amazing hyperspectral imaging scanner. As you can see, these are the 4 areas of our work, and we do also quite a lot of material testing and aging. So as part of the grant, we were able to upgrade our lights aging chamber. Examples of how we have used this equipment over the years. Of course, as I mentioned, we are supporting our conservators in their projects. So this is an example of a Japanese coatee where we did investigations to understand the metal work. And we deployed, of course, our portable XRF initially, but also we were able to take some small fragments and also examine them under the SCM. Over the last year, we have been able to join an amazing digitization program we have in our palaces to digitize our royal ceremonial dress collection. And as part of this program, we were able to scan 110 objects and create their models. So we hope to share a small fraction of this work in the Google Arts and Culture. I think this program will be released around in March this year. But also gradually through our website, we will be making available these amazing models, which range from Queen Victoria to Queen Alexandra and other ceremonial dresses, and of course Diana. We worked also very closely with, as I mentioned, with our curators and surveyors in projects that they were coming up as a surprise. So this was a discovery we had in the Queen's Drawing Room in Hampton Court Palace. It was a graffiti hidden behind paneling. So the panel had structural issues. When we removed it, we discovered this graffiti, which we recorded with analytical instruments, but also 3D laser scanning. The panel is back, but now we have a 3D model of it and all the data to continue studying it. We also work at the Tower of London, again in collaboration with our curators, our building curators, to record the graffiti we have at the Tower of London, which is extensive. So we deployed, again, portable analytical equipment, but also our 3D laser scanner. And the digitization of these collections, it has generated some new information in terms of deciphering important graffiti. And we have been in the TV discussing about this project in the Behind the Tower of London program we have at Channel 5, but also in, for example, ITV News. So quite interesting outcomes as part of our collaboration. Another important application we have developed over the last years is to deploy our hyperspectral imaging scanner and set up a method to analyze non-invasively dyes in historic tapestries. So these are tapestries in the Great Hall. It's part of the set of Abraham tapestries. And you can see the scanner on the left. This scanner can scan 1.5 meters to 1.5 meters areas. It was the first prototype that Clyde created because we wanted, our tapestries are very large. The Abraham tapestries are 5 meters to 8. And as part of this project, we were able to map the materials of, that they were used for creating the tapestries. We have a paper based on this first application, but also we have been able to use an archive of samples that they were dyed with original 16th century recipes, which was developed as part of a European Union project 20 years ago, but we have it available in our lab. And we were able to use this as an external library to really characterize the dyes, and not only characterize them, but also map them individually, as you can see in the slide. As a follow-up of this project, we were able to receive a further grant to upgrade our instrument from the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology as part of the Rio infrastructure grants. And now we are having access to a SWIR camera, and we can go, we have access to the full spectrum for hyperspectral imaging, and also more portable setup for our cameras. We are also being able to receive funding through the RICHES program that Dave mentioned earlier, and that is as part of the collection strand. So we received almost £434,000 to organize our physical samples and our data collections. So you can see the project started in September 2024. It's going to last 22 months. I'm the project lead, and my colleague Moira is the co-lead, and we have a large team from historic royal palaces, ranging from conservators, curators, archivists, surveyors, because we're going to do upgrades, our research team. So we are really excited being able to create this facility. We hope to organize over 6,000 samples that range from fragments of historic tapestries, as you can see on the left, because previously when they were conserving tapestries, actually they were cutting off areas that they were weak. And now we have over 100 samples that we use for our research. But at the bottom, we have a lot of paint samples that they are not accessible. They are actually in bags, and as part of the project, we're going to create upgrade spaces and equip them with storage facilities to organize these collections. And as I mentioned, we're going to organize our data. Data that, again, they range from over 20 years ago, 2 European Union projects, several PhD projects, and internal long-term research. They're going to be organized under the FAIR principles, and we have already a server dedicated for this purpose, and we hope to extend it. And as part of the RICHES grant, we are going to have also access to people, which is very helpful for us to deliver this kind of work. We're going to have 2 catalogers helping us organize the samples, and a coordinator post, which we hope to have to be able to organize our data. And also we are going to be joining the RICHES infrastructure platform, so all this information will become accessible eventually when our facility is developed, and that we hope to be in July 2026. So watch this space. We have amazing external partners for the project, ranging from heritage organizations, academia, industry, and practitioners. I'm not going to talk about the access of the facility. This process now is being developed by the RICHES team, but I'm sure you will find out more closer to the time when the facilities are become available. And following these infrastructure upgrades, we have also been able to provide access to our facility to other organizations. So for example, the National Archives and other colleagues, they were able to access our hyperspectral imaging to decipher text behind stains. We have had quite a lot of engagements, many visits in the lab, and a lot of activities in the social media, but also the press, as I mentioned. And also we're working with our colleagues to really demonstrate how science can support our conservation work. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Constantina. I think we have time for one question from the audience. If not, I have one very quick. So you produce a lot of 3D imaging, and in a heritage environment, it's very difficult to provide access to those. I was wondering, I mean, you mentioned the Google Art project, but how do you provide access to the other types of 3D imaging that you're producing, like the graffiti one, for example, at the Tower of London?
So it depends on the project, and it depends on the type of data. So we will be having a review process internally. So when we have a request for providing access to our data, even if it's 3D, even environmental monitoring, analytical data, if it's something that it doesn't relate to, it has been published, it doesn't have any IPI issues, of course we will go ahead immediately and provide that. Otherwise, we will have our collections forum, and we will go through the process there. So we will be presenting the case internally, and we will be receiving advice, because of course the data is not owned by us, it's owned by Historic Royal Palaces, and also some of our collections even owned by the Royal Collection Trust, for example, the historic tapestries. So there will be some processes in place, but overall our aim is to support research. So if that request will be supporting this type of activities, I'm sure we will be offering access. But if it relates to, for example, production of products or other applications, that might be something we need to consider further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone? Okay, thank you very much, Constantina.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Katerina Laina, Collection Care Manager at the Parliamentary Archives, UK House of Lords. Katerina will present tracing paper detectives, sharing intriguing case studies and investigative techniques used in the care and conservation of archival materials. Please welcome Katerina.
Can you all hear me? Oh yeah, I can hear myself. It sounds very impressive. It's going to be something much more simpler than that. So what I have today for you, it's a video, and it's a collaboration between the Parliamentary Archive Collection Care team. We are just a small team of 5 conservators, and the Parliamentary Digital Service film production team, which is 3 people. So it's a very small team from what we put together for you today. These are some photographs from behind the scene. What we were trying to do is we were trying to tell a story about the plants that we have in our collection for the industrial revolution in the United Kingdom for 18th and 19th century. But we wanted to tell the story in a different way. We didn't feel that words would be just enough to convey, so we wanted to engage audiences in a different way. So what we've done is we put together cinematographers, conservators, and accessibility. We use subtitles and BSL language. And yeah, we created that video. So for the rest of the 12 minutes of my presentation, just please enjoy the video. And I think we are ready for it.
Inside the Victoria Tower at the Houses of Parliament is a laboratory where a team of highly skilled professionals is working to save our precious history. It involves a great deal of detective work and forensic analysis. This is the story of Parliament's conservators and a race against time to protect fragile maps and plans on transparent paper that reveals so much about our industrial beginnings in the 19th century.
Hello, I'm Katerina, Laina, Collection Care Manager at the Parliamentary Archive. In this film, we're going to tell you more about the work we do as conservators at UK Parliament to repair and preserve transparent paper in our collection. In some ways, our work is like being a detective, as you will find out, and that's one of the reasons that we absolutely love it. Transparent paper is commonly known as tracing paper, and it's a fascinating treasure trove of information.
The plans are illustrating the changing landscape of the UK during the Industrial Revolution. These plans were presented to Parliament during the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries. It was mandatory to present the proposed development to the Parliament since 1794. So you can see on them everything from the waterworks, railways, sewage systems, changes to the street systems. You can find the record about every village and city all over the UK.
Some plans are small, hand-drawn and coloured. Some are printed, and some examples in the collection are over 8 metres long. They would often come with other documents to support the application, such as an estimate of expense, a book of reference, and cross-section drawings of the proposed works. They reveal how our built environment was transformed as Britain industrialised. Many of these survive in the archives of Parliament and are called deposited plans. These plans are still important today. Lawyers consult them to understand, for instance, where rights of way are positioned, and family and local historians look at them to see who lived in the area at the time and gather other useful information. So what is transparent paper, and why was it used so much for these plans? Engineers and architects like to use a certain type of transparent paper, known as prepared or impregnated tracing paper. It's produced by treating a sheet of paper with oils and resins that makes the paper more transparent, and it's a technique that's been in use since the 15th century. When your takeaway fish and chips is wrapped in paper, you might have noticed that it becomes greyish and clear where oil soaks through. Why does it do this? If you look at this kind of paper closely with a microscope, you can see layers of fibres meshed together, creating a rough, irregular surface. When light hits the paper, the rays are scattered and diffused. To our eyes, it makes the paper look solid. But when oils are added, they fill these air gaps to make it smooth and dense. The light that's transmitted through the paper looks transparent to our eyes. During the 18th and 19th centuries, new techniques were developed to produce different types of transparent papers to meet the great demand for them. But because they're made of cellulose, an organic material derived from plant cells, they decay over time. Too much light or damp conditions can speed up this decay, so the paper becomes brittle. Transparent paper turns a dark yellow-brown colour as it ages, and they're particularly vulnerable to damage. That's because the texture is dense. There's not a lot of flex for the paper fibres as the paper's moved around. These deposited plans at Parliament are often very large, so they can be awkward to handle and stored without being folded or crushed. Over time, these plans suffer tears. Pieces go missing, and they break down along the fold lines and creases. So it's the job of our conservators to repair and preserve them, so as many people as possible can access them now and in the future. You could think of them as detectives, painstakingly investigating the scene of the crime where the damage has taken place, looking for forensic clues and working out what's happened and what needs to happen next. To find out what kind of condition they're in, the survey is being carried out during 2023. It's a massive undertaking. There are around 30,000 records in the collection. The survey is helping us to identify the condition of these plans. Sadly, many are in poor condition. Some are bound in large books, a few are simply rolled and wrapped in archival paper and stacked onto shelves. Others are stored in boxes. We have examples of plans that were repaired and treated in the 20th century using techniques we wouldn't use now, such as lamination with solvent-based adhesives. Today our approach is to intervene as minimally as possible. We do what's needed to help documents and other items survive. Materials we use for treatments will not, to the best of our knowledge, damage them or affect their appearance or the information in them. At the heart of all our activities is the importance of research. We learn about new techniques and approaches from the cultural heritage community, and we do our own research too. As part of a pilot project, we've picked 5 examples of transparent paper plans that the survey tells us are in very poor condition. We're researching treatments, and with our team's wealth of experience, we can try the latest methods on these plans. The idea is to find a reliable technique that we can use for our collection in the years to come.
What we're looking at is a plan to build the Coventry Market House. It was submitted to Parliament in 1863. It gained royal assent in that year, and the Market House was completed in 1867. So we chose this plan as part of the pilot project because it was originally backed onto a much thicker paper, and then that was then backed onto canvas. And the reason for that was to make it much more robust so it could be handled as a working document, we believe. However, unfortunately, because tracing paper is so much thinner than the papers that they were glued onto and then the canvas, it meant that this was in incredibly fragile condition. So this particular tracing paper was very, very pleasing to work with because it reacted so well to the treatment that we devised for it. And as you can see now, it's lying very flat, it's supported, it's usable for researchers. It really gave a very good result visually and obviously for the benefit of the item.
This is a tracing paper drawing from one of the deposited plans at the archive. It's from the 1880s, and it is a drawing of proposed labourers' cottages in Ireland. This plan had added complications. I did some testing at the beginning, and the media was sensitive to water. There is iron gall ink present, as well as a red colour that dissolves in water. And so in the treatment of this plan, I had to find a method that would account for those problems and use one of the methods available to me that would have the least use of water as possible. Some of the plans that have been treated in the past have much more robust treatments that will last forever but can cause damage in and of themselves. We tend to repair in a slightly more delicate way where we know it will have an end, but it can be redone as opposed to something that is never reversible.
The scale of the challenge is this. We have approximately 30,000 deposited plants in our collection. Let's assume that half of it, 15,000 plants, are on tracing paper. Let's keep the math simple. Let's assume that one tracing paper takes 1 day to be treated. That means that within a calendar year, working days, 250 of them, that approximately will take 60 years of one single conservator to treat tracing papers in our collection. We got to prioritize. It's important to understand when and how and what needs to be done. So we have to consider 3 criteria in this situation. One is the condition of the item. Second is the expertise of the conservator that will be working on it. And third is the purpose. What exactly are we trying to achieve and for what purpose? What is the usage of that specific item? So in a way, it's a continuous circle. It's a never-ending story of conserving something whilst others deteriorating. It is a race against time. It's a never-ending process.
I think paper is a very powerful material because it already won competition with parchment and the other materials that we're writing on. I can't really imagine the future without the paper, and thinking about it back into history, I think that I'm right when I'm saying that the first computer coding cards were actually paper cards. So it's not that, things are changing and we're able to digitize information. However, we probably make notes, our birth certificates are still on paper. There is a lot of information I think we don't even realize every day.
One of the reasons why I chose to go into archives is because they are a record of people. Paper is an incredible item throughout history that people have been comfortable with underlining and crossing out and ripping and cutting up bits to use as other things. You kind of get all these amazing threads of history, but in a very personal and inclusive way for all different types of communities throughout history.
It will be in your drawer, you can hide it, you can take it with you. So I guess paper will stay with us for quite a long time. And there is another thing, it's a little bit more sentimental, and that's why personally I love paper the most, is that you can scribble your secret diary on it and it won't be in the cloud.
Thank you very much, Katerina, for providing us with such a beautiful video. It was very inspiring. I really enjoyed it. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, I think we have one question here. Hands up.
Hi. I was wondering, kind of halfway through the video, there was a drop of liquid that was put onto the tracing paper, and then the tube went down on top. I was just wondering what the treatment was, because I've never seen that before.
Dramatic effect, I would say. I mean, we experimented with different things, how they look into camera, and I think this is what the video tried to do. In terms of conservation, yes, of course, all the samples are real, and we worked on real material, and it was nerve-wracking because we had the cameras looking at us. But a lot of the other tiny little things that you've seen, it was just created as, visual effect to, engage with the audience a little bit more. So it was just for dramatic effect.
Well, thank you anyway, because it was, I didn't know that much about a tracing paper, and it's an amazing new world.
Because that's what we wanted to do the video, because tracing paper is a nightmare for all conservators, and I'm pretty sure that the National Archive can also relate to the challenge that we have. So again, even if we want to bid or fundraise for working on it, it's just a material that, yes, it's problematic. So things like that can help us raise awareness of why it's important to do something about it. So great, I'm very happy that you find it interesting.
It's a great storytelling and very impressive video making. Can I ask, what was the, how did the collaboration with the filmmakers changed your team and your team's perspective on the idea of engagement with the public? Because as far as I know, a lot of the conservation was done indoor and the public doesn't know, and that's why when people look at the paper, they are not aware of how much work it has been put into.
Yes, so that's a huge challenge for us, because as conservators, we always work behind the scenes. So it's very difficult to try to put us in front. So even the fact that, the 5 of us had to do all of that in front of the camera, it was something that the film crew were literally talking to us for days and days and days. We want to hear more, you can do this. Let's try to find an interesting narrative. So it was more about having the faith and the trust that the people that are keen to put this on film, which is in this instance is the film crew, were actually very supportive, and they gave us the courage in a way to stand in front of the camera and do all of these things. But during the process, I'll say that this is the third video that we've done. So we did 2 more, and we are in the process of doing another one. So I think we actually start liking it. So I think the first one was the most difficult one to do, and it was not obviously the same quality, but eventually we evolved, and we learned how to put ourselves in front of that. It's absolutely worth it. Yes, it's daunting, but in terms of public engagement, what we've noticed after the release of that video, we had a lot of archives coming to us and asking us questions about what we do for the tracing paper collection and how we treat it, what was the survey about, what was the treatment methodology. So even though it doesn't go into that detail, because it was not meant to be a conservation of how to do video, we got a lot of very interesting responses from smaller archives across the UK that they came to our studios and talked to us just because they have seen that video. So again, it created a lot of noise and a lot of public awareness, and they knew where to find us. So yes, difficult, but yes, quite joyful at the end.
I think that's it. If you have more questions, I think we'll have plenty of time at the coffee break. Thank you very much, Katerina, again. So our next speaker is Dr. Lucia Burgio. She's lead consortium scientist at the Victoria and Albert Museum right around the corner. Lucia's presentation is titled When Scientists Are Embedded in Collection, the V&A Example. Please welcome Lucia.
Which of the two? I
think both of them, and one of them has the laser pointer on it.
Right. Thank you very much for the introduction. I think this works, right? You can hear me? Can I have my, too sophisticated, right. Right, I thought I would give you the context I work in first. I work just across the road at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the V&A has got a science lab made of a dedicated team of scientists working on collection-related issues. We provide services to V&A colleagues. We also do research, and we give access to our experience and expertise and equipment to people from other institutions who may need it. This is a list of the equipment that we have. My team provides scientific analysis and technical examination of objects in particular. And a lot of this equipment was bought with or replaced thanks to a very generous grant from the UKRI AHRC about 3.5, 4 years ago. You would ask, why are our analytical services needed and from the inside of a collection? There are so many different answers to this question. The first one is we provide information about the materials of our objects to conservators who can then decide what is the best treatment or approach to use for a specific problem or object. Curators may have curatorial questions, academic questions about the objects and may require our input. If we get new objects into our collections, we may be asked to investigate them and find out more about their materiality, their history, their state of conservation, and so on. And in this particular picture, you can see this beautiful carved ivory that we saved for the nation last year, thanks to a very, very generous list of donors that put together something like £2 million so that this object could remain in the UK. Or we simply need to provide information to write the labels, or to put in catalogues, or to put into V&A research publications. We help with finding out about the authenticity, the date, the attribution, the provenancing of our objects. If you've seen the program Fake or Fortune, I can't remember what the title is, we do a little bit of that too. And of course we do research on, especially on special objects, on special cases that may require additional attention. Most of what we do happens within what I call the magic triangle. We don't work in isolation. We always interact with conservators and curators, and we form this kind of triad. And all the analysis that we do has a practical and tangible purpose and outcome. We don't do research for the sake of research. It does need to have a practical purpose. And I'm going to give you a few examples first. The first one is the longest one, so bear with me, but it's a long story. Some of you may already be aware of it. This is a cabinet from Colombia from the 17th century. It came into the museum in 2015. And because it was believed to be the very first item of its sort in a UK public collection, we dedicated quite a lot of time in understanding its materiality and makeup. It's made of barniz de pasto. I don't have the time to describe exactly what it is. It's an indigenous American lacquer. And if you want to know more, go and read the special issue called Lacquer in the Americas, or some of the posts in my blog on the V&A website. And you'll find a lot more about this. The fact that not all was as it seemed came when we looked at the lid. This is what you see with your naked eye. And this is the X-radiography of it. The two things have nothing to do with one another. So there is obviously something happening underneath. And if you see, this one is a close-up of the center. You can see that there is this weird skeleton in the center. The next step was to do microcomputer tomography. I don't have the results here. That confirmed that there was something underneath. And then we went to use XRF mapping. And in this case, you can see the mercury map that shows quite clearly that there is a skeleton there, and most of the rest of the decoration also contains mercury. Now, brief pause about the presence of mercury. Mercury is normally associated with cinnabar, a red pigment. In this case, we didn't have any cinnabar at all. From the Raman analysis of some of our cross-sections that I had taken from the object from areas of loss, I got this spectrum, which is the spectrum of mercury 1 chloride. Now, this is not a new material. It's been known for centuries throughout history in different countries, but it was known as a medicine, not as a pigment. This was the first time that it was being documented as a proper paint pigment. And if you want to know what kind of medicine it was, anything could be cured with calomel, with mercury chloride. If you needed a laxative, you could get a purgative of explosive power, which contained mercury mercury chloride. If you wanted to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, you would get the same material. If you wanted to cure them, you would use the same material. If you were depressed, you would use that too. And this one has stopped. Oh no, it's working now. If you had a teething baby, you could use teething powder containing mercury chloride. And you can even buy it today on the internet. And I don't need to tell you that it's poisonous. Don't buy it. I don't know how it can still be bought. Bottom line, we did this kind of first discovery, but at the same time, there were other teams in the UK who were researching, had happened to find the same material. So one of my colleagues at the Fitzwilliam Museum, Paola Ricciardi, happened to detect the same pigment on a portrait miniature and on medieval manuscript illuminations, more or less at the same time. So, serendipity in chemistry and in heritage science. Going back to the lid of the cabinet, everything that I analysed on the surface of that lid was from the 20th century. And here you can see, for example, the traces or the signature of titanium white through its XRF titanium map. You can see that it does match this time with what your eyes see. But there were so many other modern pigments, the latest of which had been first invented in 1958. So obviously what we see today, or what we saw until a short time ago, was very recent. And this is where it does show the usefulness of having a team of scientists embedded in collections. Because of our discoveries and our discussions with curators and conservators, we were able to take the decision that what we see, or what we saw there, could go. It didn't have any historical significance. It was, in the best case scenario, slightly less than 50 years old. So it didn't really mean anything for our collection. So with additional scientific analysis, we enabled our colleague, Dana Melker, a senior conservator of furniture with a specialism in lacquer, to understand what she needed to do, what kind of solvents she needed to combine and in which form, in order to remove anything that was not wanted and reveal the original surface of the decoration. And so she put together this two-part gel treatment, which you can see here in action. The gel applied here on the murky surface, the gel dissolving the coating, and then removing the gel reveals the surface in its pristine conditions. That is for the varnish. And then for the 20th century, this is another example of before treatment and after treatment. You can see what difference knowing what to do from a conservation point of view allowed us to achieve. We can see the decoration much better and interpret it in a much better way. And then, of course, we could remove the modern paint and reveal what was lurking underneath. And it's a lot more colourful than we thought it would be. So this is the whole casket before and after treatment, and in its open configuration before and after treatment. And obviously what you see on the lid here is not the same thing that you see now. The second example is the discovery of arsenic glass in the Lemon album, which is a collection of stunningly colourful early 18th century designs for woven silk textiles. You would say, what? They are blueprints that were given by a designer to an artisan to set up the loom so that silk brocades could be produced. And they tend to have colourful decoration, but some colours are also dull, faded, or altered. So our scientific analysis had very, very practical purposes. First, we needed to evaluate the state of the designs for conservation, storage, and display purposes. We wanted to identify the artist materials, to compare them with what was available at end use at the time, and to better inform the choice of conservation treatments. And we wanted to reconstruct the original appearance of the designs, where there was degradation or fading of the original materials. Now, have a look at this one, and keep in mind the fact that there is so much orange around it. And look at this other one here. This orange material contains a lot of arsenic, but it did not contain the conventional mineral origin arsenic pigments. It contained arsenic glass, the synthetic version of orpiment or realgar or pararealgar. When you look at it under the microscope, you can see a lot of nice particles, all different colors, with the typical features of a glass. And of course, we identified it with Raman microscopy, which is my specialism. So, what does that tell us? Apart from the fact that it's nice to reveal something that has rarely been found on objects in museums and collections. First of all, health and safety applications. We need to use PPE when handling these objects. They do contain arsenic. Secondly, arsenic glass tends to be a lot more stable than mineral-containing orpiment, which tend to fade or degrade under light exposure quite easily. So again, this helps us understanding and deciding in what conditions to exhibit or display these objects. And finally, there are a lot of historical, societal, socioeconomic implications, because the fact that we could find this relatively rare or rarely identified material used in such abundance means that one was relatively easy to get and it was relatively abundant. So little kernels of truth to be disseminated to the relative specialist who could make more sense of them. Last but one example, the discovery of spherical copper resonate. It all started with a routine analysis of a coromandel screen. Coromandel is a special type of Chinese lacquer. And we noticed that there were some of the green areas that you can see here and there that were very brittle, like green sugar. So I started looking at it, and I discovered that there was a material that had never been described before, which we called spherical copper resonate. And the reason for the name is that when you look at it under the microscope, it looks like green caviar, green fish roe, transparent green particles. And when it's on its own, it's difficult to tell that there are these spherical particles there, but it becomes really obvious when it's mixed with lead white, which acts as a matrix and as a background to look at all the beautiful, perfectly spherical particles. So what we discovered is that when it's used on its own, it doesn't have any medium, it's sticky on its own, so it could be applied as it was, but over time, it loses cohesion and it crumbles away. When it's used with lead white, it's kind of stuck in its position and it doesn't degrade too much. So that one conveyed the correct information to the conservator who could use the correct consolidant for such a material and the right amount of TLC. And we could export all these findings to the treatment of all the other coromandel objects in our collections. And once we published the paper, the same information was made available to all the other collections in the world containing coromandel objects, who started contacting us. Do you know what? We also found a spherical copper resonate now that you told us what to look for. So that, again, tells you that the tendrils of helpfulness and impact that scientists embedded in a collection can do. Final slide. Applications of scientific analysis to authentication, attribution, and dating of objects. Take these two, were acquired in 1910, supposedly from the late 16th century, were acquired as authentic objects. But at some point, someone said, hold on a second, they look like 19th century copies. And then a few years later, what copies? They are actual forgeries. So we did the scientific analysis, and through the identification of the materials, how they were used, where they were used, in what combination, and so on, we could tell that one, they were authentic, they were not copies, they were not forgeries, but we could go further. I could tell that these were probably by Hilliard or his workshop, and then when we compared notes with the curators and the conservators, they confirmed that, yes, from a stylistic point of view, it makes sense that they could be by Hilliard. In conclusion, at least at the V&A, we work within this magic triangle, never in isolation, but always in a collaboration with curators and conservators. Our work supports and underpins conservation decisions, display and storage decisions, dating and provenancing studies, authentication and attribution studies, labels on a display case, you know, from the lofty to the mundane. And research is always undertaken with an eye on how the V&A and the wider cultural heritage community can benefit from it. And this is a quick thank you to everyone who has contributed to these studies. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for your beautiful presentation. I have to say, you'll always have me from the moment you talk about amorphous snake sulfide, you know, you have me in the corner.
Well, I'm not surprised.
Before I open the floor for a question, I have one question for you. So you talked about authentication, and I've worked in a museum where we had to deal with that. If those two miniatures ended up being fake or even forgeries, how would you deal with that in a museum where if you kind of opening a Pandora box, I guess, in so many ways?
I wouldn't deal with it.
Well, yeah.
I would have discussions with all the relevant people, and then a collegial decision would be made. Eventually, it would rest with the curatorial departments who own the objects and maybe the trustees and the director. But normally, because we have everything in the open, there is nothing, that we keep secret, or it would probably be published. The labels and the collections online will be changed, and take it as it comes. Okay, on a case-by-case study. Okay.
Great, thank you. Any question? Yeah, here first, then Lucia. I think the first one.
Yeah. I'm an artist, I'm not a scientist, but what's the draw to unveiling what's underneath a painting? Like, why would you want to know what's underneath, and why would you take away that top layer? Because if as artists, we reuse various things we have in our studios. We might reuse a canvas or a sheet of paper or a sculpture, and we want it, and that final piece is the final piece. What is the draw? I'm not saying what you've done is wrong. I'm just wondering what's that pull like, and then to clean off a surface to show something that's older.
Okay, first of all, let me contextualize it slightly. I've been at the V&A for 25 years. This is the first time that a decision like this is made under my of things that I may have had a hand in. So it's not normal. It's not what people in a museum normally do. Yeah, in this case, we knew that the quality of the craftsmanship was very poor. We suspected that it had been done about the time that the object changed hand the last time round, just to sell it more easily. And we knew that there was a lot of information that could help us contextualize the connection between the Spanish invaders and the indigenous people from an a symbolic perspective, because there were a lot of little icons and little drawings and things that we could see through the X-rays that we needed to take out in order to understand the object better. So there were a lot of reasons. It took us years to decide what to do with it. So in this case, these were the primary reasons, but don't think that it is the normal course of action.
And if I may add, I think a similar approach happened in Belgium with the Ghent altarpiece, where they actually removed 80% of what one can see. But the same to what Lucia said, the whole thing happened over many, many hours of discussion with leading experts in the field. And then there's also, I'm guessing, and same in your situation, the original hand versus what was not intended by the artist originally and what had been applied to it much later on, and that actually kind of changed the reading of the work of art from an art historical standpoint. I think that's also some of the thing.
I'm thinking of it as an artist, but the art history is extremely relevant, and I didn't kind of put that together. But yeah, it's obviously to understand what goes on and everything. Thank you.
Hi, Seb. So yes, there was a lot of conversation about this when we were discussing about this research. I wanted to ask you, now that it's been, the layer inside has been removed and you have revealed all these organic dyes and those really vibrant colors. My question was if it has changed information or guidelines on how that item should be displayed, because obviously you don't want in the future that those colors can fade as it has happened on the outside of the items. Has there been a conversation on that side with preventive teams?
We have given our recommendations, and I believe that the object is going to be displayed with the lid down. Again, the decision will not be mine. It will be rotated with other Barniz de Pasto objects, and again, we can only provide the evidence and our recommendations. Then decisions are made taking into account a lot of other aspects.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lucia. So our final presentation in this session is a collaborative talk focusing on an artistic collaboration using 3D printing. The presentation will be given by Alex Christopherson, a mechanical engineer graduate from Imperial College, and David Samuels, an artist. They will discuss how engineering and artistic practices merge through innovative use of 3D printing technology. Please welcome Alex and David.
We've had a little bit of an accident today where, unfortunately, the eyepiece, we'll get onto that later, has snapped off in the rucksack, which is a shame.
It's been safe for months. Getting lots of attention, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so this is my master's project from last year. It was proposed by Ambrose Taylor and partnered up with David from the Park Royal Design District to create something. So, is this going to work? There we go. Yeah, we'll just talk a bit about who we are, background of the project, sort of how we progressed with the project, what equipment Imperial College has, and then what the response was. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm David. I'm an artist and a maker. My studio's in Park Royal, where Alex came around and met me. I've been producing art for my whole life and run a business around it as well.
As I say, I graduated last year. I now work at an electric truck charging startup, so very different. But I've always been very interested in the arts. In fact, that picture of me is me performing at a comedy musical I wrote about Liz Truss. And so I knew that I wanted to do some form of master's project that wasn't really, looking at your fluid dynamics in a U-bend, for example. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So when I saw this project, I absolutely leaped on it. The initial idea from Ambrose was the college is expanding hugely in West London with halls of residence, a new campus, all sorts of stuff. And so the college is really linked with the Park Royal and Old Oak Common Redevelopment Company. And another part of that is the Park Royal Design District. So why not work together? Because this could be a really mutually beneficial partnership. There's over 250 studios in the district with artists like David, creative industries, even startups that have come out of Imperial. And so they could make use of the expertise in the college or the equipment in the college, and the college could make use of the resource, the creativity in the design district. But the question is, so this is an example of one of the startups where they sort of related to what I was doing. It's a massive 3D printer where they can print houses out of paper pulp or ground coffee beans. But the question was how to begin this collaboration. And what was decided, really, is that get a Mech-Eng fourth year student to figure it out. Two parts. One, create a framework for collaboration, which could be, what equipment is there to use, what tools can actually be shared, how over the course of a year, let's say an academic year, can that project work? And very quickly we decided the only real way to do that would be to actually make something, learn by doing, right? So that's what we did. And we'll talk about that bit because the actual framework is a little less interesting.
Yeah, so I'm an abstract artist, predominantly. I can paint anything, though, if anyone wants anything. But I'm an abstract artist at heart. And, I make and paint all the time. And so I make these sculptures out of chicken wire and paper mache and plaster. And they're natural forms. I freestyle all of them. And they're basically about humans. All of them are about humans. There's not much nuance to it. It's literally the shape is the human. The hole in the centre of every one of my pieces is the heart. Not that it's missing. I'm just highlighting that there's a heart in everyone. But again, I know that. Not everyone else knows that. They see the piece. It is what it is. But that's what I'm making anyway, are humans with their hearts being shown. And all of my pieces, even the flowing paintings, these are about fractures in life and movement in life. But again, very personal to me, and I don't really mind what people take from the work. But that's my stuff, and that's what Alex came to see me about. He'd seen a couple of my big sculptures, and well, Ambrose had, and was intrigued to do the introduction.
Yeah, so to narrow down the scope of the project, we focused specifically on additive manufacturing or 3D printing, because it's still a fairly new technology, and the college is lucky enough to have a lot of equipment that no one else really has, and definitely equipment that artists don't really have access to. Some of the printers cost tens of thousands of pounds.
Didn't even know they were real.
Yeah. And so what we wanted to do was really highlight the difference between conventional manufacturing and additive manufacturing. So a question for you, which of these two do you think is easier to make with conventional manufacturing methods? It's not a trick question, just point, I don't know. One on the left, we've got left, everyone, oh, that's weird. This side of the room is all saying left, this side is all saying right. Okay, well, in my opinion, this side of the room is correct. The one on the right is built out of flat panels that are cut and then put together by David. And that's basically how a lot of manufacturing or automated manufacturing has worked. You take sheets, you cut them, you bend them, you weld them, you bolt them. It's a lot easier. And that's pretty much what David did. I'm sure David would have loved to have a robotic arm to hold them in place while he taped them.
Would have been handy.
But, that's a more conventional method. The one on the left, however, it looks more organic. It looks simpler, right? You could take a block of clay and form that, or David uses chicken wire and plaster. But if you wanted to make that with conventional methods, you'd probably end up with a big block, and you just end up cutting away forever, producing all sorts of waste. It would be quite a long process, and you wouldn't get a very smooth finish. You'd need lots of post-processing. With a 3D printer, though, you can create all sorts of weird geometries. The bolt there, normally you would turn a bolt on a lathe, you'd have to cut out the thread, you'd press or cut the head. There's no better example of organic geometry than printing a human hand, surely. And just to show the diversity of what a 3D printer can do, we've got a house or a vegan steak. Now, I'm a vegetarian and I still wouldn't eat that, but it looks pretty grim. But that's just to show you the range of what 3D printing can do. And so, yeah, that's what we wanted to explore with this project.
So it blew my mind when I met Alex. He's the same age as my nephews, and just like, what's wrong with my nephews? He came into my studio through an introduction through Ambrose, and he asked me about my work, and then he came up with the idea on the spot. I know he had some direction and he had a reason to move forward, but in my eyes, I just saw someone take one of my pieces and then just develop this bring me into a completely new world. And so I made an original piece, which is that second piece, the draft piece. I made an original piece for him, which I didn't end up painting. I always paint my pieces after I make them. And I gave it to him as a raw plastered piece, basically. And from there, he scanned, made the model, and developed. And as this information was coming back to me, my mind is blown with what he's done with my piece and the fact that I can see it in a 3D format. He taught me how to use another program as well on the computer to help tessellate the image. And it's blown my mind, this whole process. And it's been an absolute treat working alongside Alex.
Thank you. So this is an overview of the process. We'll go through it in more detail now, but just to give you a rough idea of what's coming in the next few minutes. So the draft David made.
Yeah, so there we are with my chicken. Basically, I'll get a piece of wood. I don't really care what size it is or what shape it is. Just ideally round or rounded, because that's the base of my person. And then, I just freestyle this shape using chicken wire, bend it, manipulate it, and then always then cut the hole out, put the heart in, which isn't visible, but it's there. And then start put first of all paper mache, then plaster of Paris, and then many layers, usually 4 or 5 layers of plaster, sanded each time to make this smooth organic shape. And I was like, go on then, Alex. And I still didn't know what he was going to do, but I was like, that's you.
I also did not know what I was going to do. So while David was doing this, I was scurrying around college trying to figure out what equipment have we got? What can we actually use? And I realized I had no idea how I was going to turn this into a digital sort of twin. I knew I didn't want to design it myself because that would be a pain. But I came across in the aeronautics department a 3D scanner, which, oh, is this gonna, maybe? Oh, there we go. And this scanner is actually just remarkable. Essentially what it does, and you can see on the right, is it projects a really high-resolution QR code onto an object. And everywhere it's projected light, which is blue in this case, and it reflects light, it maps the reflection, with what the QR code pattern was that it initially sent out. And from that, it can calculate the exact distance of the tiny little square in the QR code. And it does this, the video, which is finished now, was sort of showing what it does in live time, where it calculates those distances. And this scanner is designed for aeronautical applications, and specifically it's used to scan how a falcon might be flying, and then use that to create a more aerodynamic and bio-inspired wing. It's also been used in medical research to scan details of a human body to make prosthetics. And so it needs to be really precise. The problem is, my laptop couldn't deal with that. This created over 10 million vertices and points of something exactly that big. That's the exact same size of the draft David made. And so I had to cut it down to just 10,000 vertices, which you'll see just how big a difference. I don't know where I'm supposed to be pointing this. There we go. You can probably see just how big a difference it makes from the original scan of 10 million points to 10,000 points. And 10,000 points is still a lot of points. So that was the first stage. Next up, we had the digital twin, and David and I sat down and we cut it up into sections. At this point, we had more of an idea of what tools we had available and what kind of designs we wanted to show off. And so we came up with 5 sections to show off various organic elements, structural elements of how 3D printing works, and then a bit of a crazy addition of a microscope, which we'll get onto later. The first section, which we call the decimated section, at the bottom here, it's supposed to, I was doing a BioEng module at the same time, and it's supposed to mimic bone structure. Now, the inside of bones is optimized to be absolutely amazing in compressive strength. It's pretty useless in tensile strength, but it doesn't need to be any better. But at the same time, it needs to be really lightweight. It also needs to be hollow because our blood cells are produced inside bones. And this is a geometry that's never really, until the advent of 3D printing, no one's ever been able to replicate it. So I thought it would be really great if we could replicate that. That's what that section is. It was an absolute nightmare to design and print. It failed about probably nearly 50 times, using every single printer I could find, different materials, different support. This is something, if any of you have used 3D printers, you can't print in thin air, right? So it needs to generate support, and then you have to remove that support. If you look at the top left, there's just no way of removing all of those pillars. So eventually, the model we created, we used a special type of soluble support, and this was on probably the second most expensive 3D printer we used, the Stratasys Fortus 360, which comes in at about 150 to 200,000 pounds. So a little bit above the average range that an artist can splash out on for their studio. The next segment up, we wanted to, having looked at sort of human or animal geometry, we wanted to look at plant geometry. And tendrils like this, roots, you see them everywhere in nature. And the thing about them is they don't grow sort of how they want to grow. They grow to fill what's there and to fill the space, like the vines clinging onto trees. So you end up getting these structures that are really complicated, really random as well. And so that's what we tried to replicate here. Did so by taking the top layer of the decimated segment, extruding 40 cylinders about 10 centimeters to the above them, and then letting the computer randomly generate paths between them, and setting a few geometry restrictions to make them all nice and smooth. And again, that you just would never be able to make that other than bending wires manually and sticking them in. which I'm not counting as a manufacturing method, really. You wouldn't ever be able to make that without resin printing. And resin printing is, instead of using a solid plastic, you have a liquid, and there's an LCD screen, just like on a phone, or an old phone now. And where the screen lights up, a singular layer of resin is cured. And you build that up slowly, and that allows you to create really smooth textures like this, really complicated textures, because it requires less support than a solid-based 3D printing, which is the kind of 3D printers you might see on someone's desk.
I think you can imagine how much my mind was blown at each of these stages, because I'm literally working with chicken wire and plaster, and Alex is coming back or updating me with, I'm using this machine now, and I'm like, what on earth?
Yeah, fair. The next bit was a bit simpler, actually, thankfully. And these are some, I don't know if any of you have been to Paddington Basin. The glass sculptures at the top there, labelled 5, they're just sort of around the basin. And I thought they were really cool because the light reflects through them in a really odd way. And because I'd spent too much time clearly thinking about 3D printers, I realized actually the layered structure is exactly how a 3D printer operates. So it's called 3D printing. It's not necessarily the best name because it is just stacks of 2D layers, one on top of the other. It doesn't matter what 3D printer you use, that is the fundamental premise of all of them. And so we thought, why not create a similar glass sculpture? But in the bottom here, you see the video of the layer by layer that the 3D printer is making. And it's not hollow, it's not solid. It's got a geometry inside. And so the hope was, if we made this out of glass or perspex, as we ended up doing, you would be able to see that. You can just about see it, but it still has a quite cool effect. But what's really nice, actually, is that the perspex we used is leftover from COVID, and it was used all around the Imperial campus to separate IT screens. And it had just been sitting in a workshop because the STW, the Mech-Eng workshop leader, didn't want to bin it because perspex is really expensive. So win, being resourceful there. So yeah, that's just the layers. What's next? Good question. Okay, now we come to arguably the centerpiece of the sculpture. And this is the coolest 3D printer I've discovered on campus. It's called the NanoScribe. And as you can probably imagine, what that means is it prints on a really, really small scale to an accuracy of about 1 nanometer. That is tiny. No one really knows, and this is the problem with it, no one really knows what to do with it. We have this amazing technology. We can print something so small it can fit inside a human cell, potentially. Great. Now what? No one really knows. There's a lot of research going on. Maybe in the future we'll be able to encapsulate absolutely minuscule doses of medicine in a 3D print from that and inject it into an animal cell to treat a singular cell, to do super, super targeted therapies. Alternatively, you could print a scaffold for a stent in a capillary. Problem is, we're just not there yet, because even though we can print it, we can't inject it. And so, weirdly, this 3D printer, and this one costs hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and there's not many of them in the world, spends a lot of time sitting idle. And so when I messaged the lab asking if I could use it, I surprisingly got a yes. And then I needed to very quickly, because they emailed me on about a Monday saying, can you come on Wednesday? I needed to think what on earth we were going to print. And so in a moment of panic, we decided we were going to print a 1 to 100,000 scale model of the Queen's Tower outside, a 1 to 10,000 scale model of the sculpture itself, and the Park Royal Design District pyramid. The first print we could never find on the slide. So it's on a glass slide, and we couldn't find it. We knew it had printed because the top picture there is a camera, well, a microscope, that watches as it's printing, and that's the top of Queen's Tower. So we knew it existed somewhere. But after about half an hour of looking, we couldn't find it. So we went back to the drawing board, and we added these guidelines that extend actually 100 times in each direction, just to help us locate the print, which is bizarre. But of course, the problem we noticed then is, what on earth do we do with this slide? How do you exhibit it? So we needed to add a microscope. Again, being resourceful, Ambrose managed to find a broken microscope for free, which I took apart, found that it wasn't actually broken, it was just missing, it just had a cracked lens and it was missing a few parts. So I took it apart, reassembled it with a little interim 3D printed housing, and as you can see there, somehow it worked. And you can see through the microscope, and I just took that with my phone actually, so this is I think it's a times 1,000 magnification, I'm not entirely sure. And you can see through it exactly what we printed in remarkable detail, even the imperial logo and our names. And then integrated that into the sculpture. And that's unfortunately the bit that has snapped today, so you won't be able to look through it. But yeah, that's something definitely no one's ever seen before, I think. And then the final aspect of the sculpture is the bit David's painted on the side here. And this was to try and go back towards the comparison with conventional manufacturing methods from this sculpture David made. And if you look at the image on the left, every time I click, the resolution of the file halves. And so you see that pretty quickly it becomes pretty clunky. In fact, eventually you have 3 triangles. And that is what the computer has decided is the absolute smallest file size you can reduce David's artwork to. I'm sure he's delighted to see that.
That'd make a nice painting.
And so we came up with having a gradient from pretty coarse to really fine at the top, something like that. And then, yeah, David highlighted it in his signature bright color style, which I think looks
Alex taught
fantastic.
me how to use that program. Helped me install it, and then taught me how to use that program, and it was so much fun, like messing about with one of my images or one of my pieces on my screen, and then doing these tessellations and seeing where we were going to be happy. It was a wicked thing. And then it was his idea actually. He was like, "Do you want to paint it after?" So I was happy to bring it back to me. And
yeah, and that brings us on to the sort of finishing and final assembly of the sculpture. It's a lot of layers. Everything sort of came together with either modelled into the design, sort of 3D printed and laser cut slots or adhesives and epoxies or bolts and nuts. So a whole mix of ways of assembling it. David painted bits of it. And then we also installed electronics because the microscope needs light. It needs very bright light, in fact. And since we were installing batteries and lighting anyway, we thought, why not make something cool out of some of the other segments? And so the decimated segment, the bone structure, creates these amazing shadows. And the top section, you can just about see, the way the level of light changes with each layer is really quite cool, I think. So that was a little bonus. That wasn't necessarily planned, but we added in. And then, yeah, as we sort of finished off, the sculpture went to various sort of exhibitions and places. It was not actually finished at the exhibition in the middle there.
yeah, we showed it half finished.
Oops. That was a particularly awkward one, actually, because someone, unfortunately, while looking into the microscope, got a bit excited and knocked it over and smashed a bit of it. So I went in and added a whopping great block of steel to the bottom. But yeah, David, what do you think the response sort of was when we started exhibiting it?
So I've had it in my studio since we've shown it and since it's come back to rest, and it's sat amongst my other sculptures in my room, and it blows people's minds. They're unsure about what it is. They understand it's my work, but they can't really tell. It's plastic. It's got a microscope. Like, what are you doing, David? But it's literally been jaw-dropping to people, and they've really enjoyed it, and everyone's wanted to know the story, and they've been really intrigued. And it's blown my mind, the capabilities and how Alex's creative mind came into play through this whole process. And yeah, it's gone down a treat. And literally this morning, put my bag down and it dropped. And I'm like, it's been with me for so long.
Always happens like that.
Yeah.
I've found, yeah, like you're saying, it was just amazing seeing how interested people were and how many questions people always had about it. Because I think just so many people had never, ever seen a a project like this happen, especially at Imperial, where everyone is, 3D printers, we're going to use them for research, we're going to use all of this kind of stuff. And so to just do something completely different with it, with someone as amazing as David, was
I appreciate it, man.
really
It felt
wonderful.
like a game. It felt like playtime. It was so fun, so experimental.
Yeah.
Such a great route to go down. And this, as I said, comes back to Ambrose and Johnny Brewin, who's the landlord at Excelsior Studios, them two meeting and this relationship starting.
And what was really cool, actually, is that at my seminar presentation at the end of the year, someone in the year below me came and watched the seminar and then asked me afterwards how they could do a similar project of the art. So immediately it's sort of gone on to hopefully inspire future projects of collaboration, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's been brilliant.
Yeah. So that's that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for finishing this session with 21st century craft and art history after having heard about Tudor and Victorian era one. So thank you. Time for a couple of questions. I think we have, two. Natalie first.
Hi, thank you so much. That was such a creative project. And literally my question is what you just sort of said at the end is, so do you have any advice on how you create or foster this kind of like academic research, artistic collaboration? Maybe thinking back to what Alex March said about how the creative practice is still very much based on like who you know and how this can impact diversity and inclusivity within the practice.
Yeah, especially that point on it's based on who you know. I went into this not knowing anyone except Ambrose, and so it was really difficult at first to just figure out who we can contact, who has access to various equipment and all of this kind of stuff. And so to hopefully make that easier in the future, part of the admin side, the framework side of the project, was creating a directory of anyone who manages a lab at Imperial who I'd contacted and who were happy to be contacted in the future, that Imperial students, if they're working on a project, I'm assuming at Ambrose's discretion to share that, can hopefully find those 3D printers. It's a small start because it is only 3D printers and obviously didn't manage to find every single one. And at some point someone's going to have to update it. But hopefully that will make it a more sort of equitable type of project, because that was the biggest challenge at first, and it took months just to compile a list of contacts, because if you don't know anyone, it's very challenging.
Thank you. My question is about, you mentioned one of the pieces has like a soluble support. So how does that work? Is it another polymer? Is it the same? How did you do that?
Yes, so a lot of 3D printers now are capable of printing multiple materials at once. In fact, it's sort of become the standard that most 3D printers have at least 2 print heads. And so simply, the core material is printed in a non-soluble, and then you print out of PVA. So it's just a concentrated PVA glue, essentially. And it's not as easy as washing it off in a sink. You do require a specific washing station, but that sort of came about in the last 5 to sort of maybe 6 years of 3D printing technology, and it's changed the game entirely. Yeah.
One more question.
Hi, that was very interesting. I also used the same 3D scanner for my PhD research, and I was wondering if you had any challenges with scanning the surface at all. It's something I face, and I was curious to see if anybody else had.
Did you end up having to put all of these reflective stickers on it?
No, because I had a plank from HMS Victory, so I wasn't allowed to.
Yeah, fair. So as I was saying, the scanner projects light, and then it measures where light is reflected back. And so if you have a really matte surface or a really dark surface, like probably an ancient plank of wood from the HMS Victory, it's going to really struggle to pick up data points and measure the distance to them. Thankfully, I managed to stop David in his creative endeavors while it was still unpainted. So it was white, and it wasn't too glossy, it wasn't too matte, it wasn't too glossy, so it was actually perfect for the scanner. And I didn't have to use any sort of additional tools. Normally what you would do is you put these reflective little points or black and white crosses on it, which the scanner can lock onto and measure. But yeah, I imagine if you're not allowed to put those on, you're going to need a very bright room. Yeah. How did you overcome it?
Well, it was also immediately painted white in places, so I had to adjust the brightness as I went along.
Yeah.
2.5 meter long plank.
Wow.
I also had big violin.
Yeah.
You finished it.
I did. Yes.
Wicked.
The computer that the scanner is connected to is an absolute workhorse, and I do not know how it's still functioning. Yeah, it's remarkable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of the speakers in this session. I'm sure there will be plenty of time for questions at the coffee break. So tea and coffee will now be served in the concourse. And please, can we be back here at 3:55 for the next sessions? Thank you.